Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel 21 Hunting and Fishing. And as you saw from the thumbnail, this podcast has really nothing to do with hunting and fishing, uh, but it's a story in a true story that I hold near and dear to my heart. It's something that any Marine that is training at 29 Palm hears about. And I think it is a story that should live on. And so I really don't care. That has nothing to do with hunting and fishing. As you saw, this is going to be classified under the military playlist that I have. So let's get started. All right. So this is a story about Lance Corporal Jason Rother. He was a Marine that was left in the desert at 29 Palms, got lost, and eventually passed away. It's a very long story, and it is something that was drilled into my head, which I don't remember when. It's like, when did you learn to speak? I don't know. I just kind of always knew this at some point. I probably learned about it at a young age, training at the NROTC unit at University of Maine, and it is a story that um, talks a lot about accountability, basically accountability of Marines and responsibilities, and it is also illustrates the Swiss cheese model and how tragedies happen. Like, usually tragedies aren't just one thing that happens. I mean, it could be, but in a lot of military settings, and especially in the aviation community, they use the Swiss cheese model. It's a series of things that go wrong that eventually line up to and result in some catastrophic event. So it's like the layers of Swiss cheese. If you take a bunch of layers of Swiss cheese and line them up, you can put a pencil through the hole. I hope I'm explaining this right. And that first layer didn't catch it, the second layer didn't catch it, the third layer didn't catch it, and then the tragedy happens. And so I have actually read the entire investigation of this, and essentially the way investigations are done is they're in three parts: a Jagman investigation. So you have your findings of fact, your uh, opinions, and recommendations as the investigating officer. All your findings of fact have to be backed up by some sort of enclosure in the investigation, which is like your evidence. And then you have opinion on what happened, and then you have recommendations. In case of investigations, usually I recommend, these people be court-martialed, blah blah blah. And anyways, it doesn't matter. And I tried to find the investigation to do this podcast because it reads like a suspense novel. Like, you know the ending, and you can see the things kind of happening and what leads up to the tragedy. And this is something old that happened back in the 80s. But what I did find was something from the Navy Center for Lessons Learned, and I'm going to go through that. This is probably going to be a long one. I'm going to try to do it in just one part, but it's going to be a long one. And I have trained at 29 Palms 3 times in my career, and fatality has happened when I was training there. You can look it up. Um, there was a major who crashed his jet. He was a graduate of Top Gun, so the movie made that school famous. Both of them, I guess, at this point. It's very, very experienced, and a lot of times you see, these very experienced people making catastrophic mistakes, and I know what happened in that particular situation. I don't know what was told officially to the families, but I mean, he crashed, and anyways, um, what am I trying to say? Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, seniority and experience doesn't prevent mistakes from happening. And sometimes complacency that comes with being very senior and experienced can lead to tragedies. But I am going to go to the next slide. Again, this is my super cool high speed, low drag uh, PowerPoint technology. I'm going to read through this, and this is the first time I'm reading through it. Again, I wanted to read through the investigation. This is not going to be a entertaining podcast. Again, I'm doing this podcast because one, I think this story needs to live on, and two, um, it's interesting. It's a lesson learned. So I think, as a profession, we should continue to talk about it. And so let's get started. All right. This is lesson learned 22 tact 06. That 06 probably means this is written in fiscal year 06, and this is the 22nd lesson learned that the Navy Safety Command did. So, Marine left in desert, fatality, Rother Mishap. I'm calling it a tragedy. Introduction. There are seminal events in history that alter the way we think and operate. The aircraft mishap and fire aboard the USS Forrestal during Vietnam War was one of these events. The near sinking of an entire ship due to an errant rocket caused us to rethink how we approach naval aviation safety. For Marine Corps ground safety, the seminal event didn't come for another 20 years. This event was the death of Lance Corporal Jason Rother at Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, 29 Palms, when he was forgotten at a road guide post. So there are no there are, but you can basically turn any part of the desert into a range, and you put these road guides out to stop traffic from basically driving into impact areas. And I was trained as a OIC RSO, so OIC, officer in charge, is that acronym, and RSO is range safety officer, to run these ranges at 29 Palms. And they talk about Jason Rother and accountability. They also talk about it's just this wide open expanse desert, and they have scrappers, people that will just walk into 29 Palms in the training areas, these homeless people, and find discarded metal, and then try to sell it. And they have found these people dead in the middle of the desert because it's 120 degrees, zero water to drink. And I've seen the pictures of people coming up on a car and finding just dead people inside the car. It's a super it's super dangerous, being lost in the desert, as this tragedy will illustrate. This tragedy and the reflections of General Al Gray, Commandant of the Marine Corps at the time, forced the Marine Corps to reevaluate how they make decisions and accept risk at various echelons of leadership. Anyone who has trained in this inhospitable environment was likely heard of Lance Corporal Rother in the Desert Survival Brief. As time passes, fewer and fewer Marines have been to 29 Palms and learned about this unfortunate event. Those Marines who have, sorry about the background noise, again, an amateur podcaster here. Those Marines who have heard of it may not know the full story. If we allow the details of an event like this to be forgotten, we doom ourselves and our Marines to the risk of similar events reoccurring. We must continue to revisit and retell the narrative of how this Marine was left behind. Again, here I am retelling the story. This is a story that needs to be kept alive for sure. As I was doing some research for this podcast, I actually ran into another story of a Marine who was killed during a quote unquote dry fire event at 29 Palms. He was shot in the chest. Well, dry fire means there's no ammunition. I mean, it's a story very similar to what happened on the movie set of Rust. Someone was pointing a weapon at someone, they didn't think it was loaded, they pulled the trigger, and there was a round in the chamber, and it killed the Marine. I might do that story later as well, and it's much more recent than this. Again, this took place back in the 80s. Oh, by the way, all these photos that they include in this is not anywhere near the time frame of when this happened. These photos are much more modern. What did they say here? The information in this lesson learned product was assembled from publicly available open source documents, including the official command investigation. It does not contain information from any safety investigation report. And then I read this earlier. All the names in here are pretty well documented. This made the national news. when it happened. And so the names are unchanged to maintain continuity with other published sources. All right. Road March Planning. This event occurred during a combined arms exercise, CAX, the precursor to the present day ITX, Integrated Training Exercise. The Battalion Landing Team, BLT, conducted various training events leading up to the culmination CAX event. Just as ITX is now, these events were physically demanding, but there were no serious incidents. Lance Corporal Rother experienced a state of mild heat exhaustion during the unit's platoon live fire attack, but was deemed fit for duty by a corpsman and continued training. Yeah, heat exhaustion casualties happen all the time during this training. I've been training at, I'm so lucky. I got to go to 20 Palms in January when it sucks because it's cold, wet, and rainy because it does rain in the desert. And then 6 months later, I got to go back to 20 Palms and train in July when it's 120 degrees. And then I trained there when I was with 110 at one point too. Yeah, been there a bunch. After 12 days of training, the battalion consolidated for a 3-day CAC, so combined arms exercises. What is combined arms exercises? You have ground forces, you have air, you have all these arms combined, right? Indirect fire, things like that. Indirect fire being like mortars and artillery. Direct fire being things like, gunfire. On the first day, 29 August, they attacked and seized a strong point position. On the afternoon of the second day, the unit received a fragmentary order, abbreviating FRAGO, that they needed to conduct a motorized movement to set up a deliberate defense against likely enemy attack. Yeah, so they treat these combined arms exercises like you're in like an actual war. And essentially, a lot of the reason why the Marine Corps uses 20 Palms is it's the largest training area that the Marine Corps has, and it's essentially like a certification exercises that battalions go to in order to deploy. It's like their culminating event, and typically you would go to a CAX or Mojave Viper, they call it. They change the name a lot, but essentially the same stuff happens. You go there for 3.5, 4 weeks. You do all this training. You come back. You take your pre-deployment leave. You come back from that, and then you deploy. That's why so many Marines have rotated through. The battalion commanding officer, CO, Lieutenant Colonel Robeson, had the route planned and then issued his own FRAGO to his companies. His intent was to emplace road guides at 4 positions along their movement route. After deliberating with key leaders, he tasked his 4 companies, India, Kilo, Lima, and Bravo, a tank company attachment, to provide 2 Marines each for road guides and, except for India, 2 additional Marines to serve as a quartering party in the next assembly area. India Company was an exception since they were being helicopter lifted to the area and would not need a quartering party. A total of 14 Marines were required for the road guide and quartering party detail. So this whole road guard thing at CAX is like a really big deal. Again, like it's a huge safety issue because you can set up ranges and there are roads just kind of everywhere, and these road guards are positioned, out there alone and afraid. And they're always told, I don't care if the commandant himself says he needs to drive through here, you can't let him through because he could get killed from fire because he's about to drive into a impact zone. So, so that happens. So higher headquarters sends down a FRAGO, and then typically the operations, the S3 section, would then take that FRAGO and use that to create FRAGOs for their subordinate units. In this case, battalion being the parent command, and then the companies, India, Kilo, Lima, and Bravo, receiving the FRAGO from the S3 shop. And as I was saying, this is what I was going to say. So the road guides are super important. One of the CAXs, like they'll have like a road guard platoon. They'll no crap have like 30 Marines. This is obviously like a shit duty to get stuck on, they would find like a fucking second lieutenant and be like, okay, you're the road guard platoon commander. They'll probably give him like a staff sergeant, and then he'll have like a platoon of Marines, and all they do is this day in and day out. And they do that because one, it's important, but two, that way they can develop their own SOPs and for accountability. And instead of kind of just like this being like a secondary thought or a second thought, if you have like a platoon that's dedicated to doing this, then you know how you're going to be accounting for your Marines. That's the theory anyway. Okay, so far, big road march, and they have to move their battalion, and this is a pretty big deal. Also, side note, this is the first time I'm kind of reading through this story. It's the first time I'm reading this, and it's the first time I am even like reviewing the story for several years. But since I had this podcast and started this channel, I thought this would be a way that I can help keep this story alive. So far, everything is in order. Nothing out of the ordinary here. Okay. At the Frago meeting, the heavy weapons platoon commander, First Lieutenant Lawson, was tasked with conducting route reconnaissance and placing the road guide detail. The motor transport platoon commander, Second Lieutenant Fostel, was tasked with picking up the road guides as the end of the convoy passed. The BLT logistics officer, Captain Edwards. So this would be like who I would be. I'm the logistics officer if I was in this BLT. This is me. Briefed this plan, but there was no clear guidance or decision on how the Marines would be returned to their parent companies once the road march was complete. All right, so this is kind of like that first layer of Swiss cheese. Like you're leaving Camp Wilson. Camp Wilson is like where all the companies, all the units that are training, they're about to leave there, or some other assembly area. Assembly area is kind of what it says. It's like a permissive place where a large amount of Marines can gather to move on to do other things. So they don't have a complete plan. The command investigation found that each company assumed their Marines would be dropped off, but there was no coordination of who would be responsible for ensuring that task was effectively done and personnel were accounted for. Through this document, they have these little like key decision points. So let's read this. Key decision point. The leadership in the Frago meeting was understandably focused on the operational side of this mission, but with so many key personnel present, someone should have identified the absence of personal accountability planning, which could have prevented this mishap. Yeah, so I see this. The first time I've ever heard this term, diffusion of responsibility. There's so many staff around that someone surely is taking care of this. So everyone kind of thinks somebody else is doing it. Remember my story at TBS where I failed to properly account for the spare barrel and saw? That was a diffusion of responsibility. Like I thought everyone in my fire team, we were good. We were freaking salty TBS lieutenants at that point. I thought everyone else, when they said, oh yeah, that guy's got it, I just assumed that that was correct. So watch out. Diffusion of responsibility. It's kind of like groupthink. It can really hurt an organization. As the leaders left this Frago meeting, the confusion grew in the difficulty of hastily executing a battalion road march at night. Immediately after the Frago issuance, the adjacent artillery battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Spain, met with the BLT commander to discuss their respective motor marches, and they identified the potential problem of mingled road guides since a portion of their routes overlapped. They agreed to travel on separate axes of the MSR, main supply route. You have to understand, sometimes it's hard for me to talk in not acronyms. Anyways, maybe you picked up on that by now. But I try not to, in this document does it correctly. It has the English words, then it puts the acronym in parentheses. That doctrinally, that's how it's supposed to go in the document. And to have a 20-minute spacing between the convoys. Lieutenant Colonel Spain met with Captain Edwards to discuss this agreement and brief him on the marking plan for the artillery battalion road guides to prevent confusion when each unit's Marines were picked up. Captain Edwards did not recall this meeting, however, and this information was not relayed to the BLT Marines assigned to collect the road guides. Okay, so I hope you're getting this picture in your head, and even if this, forget that this is a military thing, forget anything. You just have a bunch of people that need to go to a similar place at night, and there's gonna be people that you're dropping off and picking up, and you have to count for them along the way. You have different chains of commands going, so it's all of a sudden there's this like confusion starting to happen, and this is one of the reasons why they do like a road guard platoon. They consolidate that responsibility, so then you don't have that diffusion of responsibility when it comes to the road guards. Further friction was caused as the road guide and quartering party details was put together. The Bravo Company commander, Captain Sheehan, sent his gunny to ensure the Marines were properly handed off and tasked, but he thought he only needed to send 2 Marines for his quartering party, despite the extended discussion that each company also needed to send 2 Marines for road guides. The Lima Company commander identified 4 Marines for the detail as required, but when his XO executive officer attempted to deliver them to First Lieutenant Lawson, he could not find him. He instead entrusted them to the battalion adjutant, believing he would bring them to First Lieutenant Lawson. The adjutant never made contact with First Lieutenant Lawson, however, and kept the Lima Company Marines with him during the movement. Okay. Let that sink in for a second. So basically what's happening is, this road guard detail, it used to kind of be like a second thought, like what I was saying. And so Gunny's like, here are these Marines. I'm giving them to someone that I'm just hoping is going to hand them off properly to the person who actually needs them. And that Gunny's busy. He's probably the company Gunny. There's about this huge road march that's going to start, and so he's focused on the logistics of that. And again, this road guard thing used to be a second thought. And I keep saying road guard because that's what's in my head. I don't think we call them road guides, but whatever. Nobody cares. The 2 India Company Marines were assigned and effectively reported to First Lieutenant Lawson and Kilo Company's 4 Marines were assigned, but were delivered 2 at a time, and were the last Marines to report to First Lieutenant Lawson. At this point, only 8 of the 14 Marines required for the road guide and quartering party detail were present. So he's 50% his manpower, a little better than 50%. That's a problem. First Lieutenant Lawson never did a collective brief for this detail before they departed, because the Marines came in fragmented groups. He instead briefed them individually as they were posted along the route. Okay, so, man, there's the Marine Corps. We don't change things, and there's a good reason. Like, maybe you saw my video about when I was talking about doing a convoy brief at the sand table in country before we leave the wire. Like, it's so important to get everyone on the same page. Like, if you have a team, it's worth bringing them in and getting everyone on the same sheet of music, even if it's just something really simple. Like, hey, these road guards have a really simple job. Stand here, don't let anyone pass. Here's some water, here's some food, here's a radio, do a radio check every so often. Here's our no comm plan, and someone will pick you up. And maybe a few other details. It's not hard, but the hard part comes when you just drop these Marines off and they just have to basically be there for hours on end. That's when it becomes hard and tests the human comfort level. Um, so I would say the lieutenant is a bit negligent in his duties already. Road guide placement. At 1900, that's 7 p.m. for you civilian types, on 30 August, First Lieutenant Lawson designated departure time. First Lieutenant Lawson's designated departure time, only 2 Marines for the detail had reported. 10 Marines later, I'm sorry, long day. 10 minutes later, the BLT XO, Major Holm, confronted him to ask why he had not left yet, since they were losing daylight quickly. At 1920, with only 8 of the 14 Marines needed for the road guard and quartering party detail, 4 from Kilo Company, 2 from Bravo Company, 2 from India, First Lieutenant Lawson decided to depart with what he had. In his haste to set off, he neglected to provide a roster of road guides to the BLT logistics officer as he requested, so Captain Edwards was never aware that the total number of Marines to be picked up was different than planned. The BLT commander was also never notified that First Lieutenant Lawson left with fewer than the prescribed number of Marines. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. Again, these CAX exercises can be stressful because there are the people running these exercises. I don't know if this is like back in the 80s, but it is now. We call them coyotes, and it was actually like a big deal. It was good for you to go and be a coyote, like an instructor, because that's the Marine Corps saying, hey, we trust you to teach a whole bunch of Marines that are coming through like your MOS. And so those coyotes kind of place stress on the battalions, which place stress on, in this case, you see it trickles downhill. And so why the lieutenant is leaving with only 8 of the 14 Marines needed is kind of weird. Um, Captain Edwards was never aware of the total Marines to be picked up. So that's not okay. How do you know you're done your job? The BLT commander was also never notified. So this is at the very least, even if a death didn't result of this, like I don't know how they were really planning on doing their job and getting from point A to point B safely. 10 minutes after departing, First Lieutenant Lawson's convoy reached an intersection that did not appear on his map or designated route. He directed his vehicles to turn off the MSR and encountered a fork where he took the left route, which most closely followed the MSR. First Lieutenant Lawson continued for another mile and stopped at a prominent rock feature on the side of the road. That was approximately 400 meters from the intersection marked as BLT, checkpoint 1. He posted Lance Corporal Rother from Kilo Company at this location. Lance Corporal Key, also from Kilo, got out of the vehicle to post with Lance Corporal Rother, but was told to reboard the vehicle to post at a separate position. Okay, so he's doing this, and if I was that position, he's saying, hey, I'm actually leaving with 50% of the manpower. So instead of posting these road guards in buddy pairs, I can't afford to do that because I have only 50% of my manpower. So I'm going to post them by themselves. That is a huge no-no in this environment. Very, very not okay to leave just one person out there. And if you listen to my TBS story time, you would hear me make light of the whole battle buddy thing, but it's serious. Yeah, you really don't want people out there alone and afraid, like really alone and maybe afraid. Their fellow Kilo Company Marines pointed out that they were directed by their company leadership to post in pairs, so that's correct. But First Lieutenant Lawson responded, I'm the lieutenant and you're the Lance Corporal. I can't believe someone would actually say this. They boarded the vehicles and moved 400 meters down the road to the intersection, which was marked on the map as checkpoint 1. It was here that Lance Corporal Key was posted. Key tried to reiterate that they were supposed to be posted in pairs, but First Lieutenant Lawson replied that he knew what he was doing. Neither Lance Corporal Key nor Rother received guidance on how they would be picked up or returned to Kilo Company. Can you imagine if you were just these like Lance Corporals just getting freaking dropped off in the middle of the desert? And I don't know. I can't remember if they had comm gear, whether they probably didn't, but man, just like out there by itself. I don't know how Lieutenant thought this was a good idea, but again, all that stress of the training exercise and it rolls downhill, and you have to make sure that you're creating a culture that doesn't do this. I think as leaders, you need to stop, and it's okay to push back on your higher headquarters if things aren't going according to plan, and it can happen at any level. And eventually everything rolls downhill, right? And at the lieutenant, lance corporal level, I mean, that's the bottom of the hill. But sometimes, you feel like that turd pile has rolled and gained momentum as it come down the hill like a big old, snowball, and you can't do much about it. Key decision point. First Lieutenant Lawson had two opportunities here to identify his error. He had taken a tactical pause and considered the protests of these junior Marines. He may have recognized his mistake. He instead allowed either his rank or his operational pressure to cloud his judgment. Yeah, I mean both, right? There was operational pressure, and he said, "Hey, I'm the lieutenant and you're the lance corporal." One thing that I remember stuck with me is someone said, the most junior person on a team might have like the best idea. Never allow your seniority to cloud your ego or your judgment. Listen to what they have to say. Lance Corporal Key was posted 20 minutes after sunset near the end of evening nautical twilight. The remainder of the route recon and posting of road guides was conducted in darkness. First Lieutenant Lawson continued to BLT Checkpoint 2, where he found the artillery unit had selected the same spot for their Checkpoint 2 and posted their personnel there. First Lieutenant Lawson decided to continue without posting any of his detail at that location. Yeah, I remember. So there's these big units going in generally the same direction, and their routes are kind of, according to this, kind of crossing. And this road guard duty, as important as it was, wasn't really being taken too seriously. And in this case, I think these guides, now that I'm kind of talking about this out loud, they call them guides because they're making sure people don't take wrong turns along the way. There's not like a live fire exercise going on, but that's typically why you use road guards, especially in the day of of GPS and stuff. You don't really need people to tell you where to go, even in a place like 29 Palms. Learn how to land nav, map and compass. 2, again, GPS. And 3, sometimes, again, if you're lucky enough like me to train at 29 Palms 3 times, you actually get to know the lay of the land a little bit. As he continued, First Lieutenant Lawson determined the northern axis of the MSR was too overgrown and that the BLT should utilize the southern axis. He was likely unaware the BLT commander had intended for the BLT and artillery unit to use a separate axis. Separate roads. Why don't they just say roads? Due to Lawson's decision, both units used the same road. They used the same MSR. That's all they had to say here. When Lawson's platoon reached Checkpoint 3, he posted the 2 Marines from Bravo Company, despite their company leadership intending them to be used as their quartering party. Lawson told them they would be identified by their chem lights and that the last vehicle in the battalion would stop to pick them up. He then continued to checkpoint 4 and posted the 2 India Company Marines. They're talking Bravo Company, India Company. Just in your head, he's dropping Marines off. He's dropping humans off along the way. Since Lawson lacked the full 14-man detail that was planned, he only had the 2 remaining Kilo Company Marines for quartering parties. He posted these Marines in the battalion assembly area to serve as a quartering party to the lead element of the battalion convoy, but there were no quartering parties for the individual companies. At this point, First Lieutenant Lawson seemed to have realized to some degree something was wrong, because he decided to send his navigator to backtrack the convoy route and ensure the road guides knew to get on the last vehicle of the convoy. So remember how he didn't brief everyone and get them on the same page. He was short manpower now, so now he's kind of like trying to fill in those gaps. He further emphasized to ensure the guys at checkpoint 1, Lance Corporal Keys with Lance Corporal Rother, another 400 meters further, knew to link up with each other at whichever position the convoy passed. His instructions may have averted the incident, but the navigator departed to backtrack the route only 30 minutes before the battalion convoy began the road march. The navigator only made it to checkpoints 3 and 4 before encountering the lead element of the BLT convoy, at which time he turned back to the final assembly area. He never reached the Marines at checkpoint 1 and 2. There are conflicting reports from First Lieutenant Lawson and his navigator about what was reported upon his return. That happens in investigations. You get conflicting word for sure. But for the most part, in investigations, you can figure out what happened, even if it's just solely based on human statements, which are fallible. The navigator stated he reported his inability to reach checkpoint 1, but First Lieutenant Lawson's recollection was that his navigator said the Marines had already been picked up by the convoy when he reached checkpoint 1. Sorry. Regardless of differing recollections, in reality, they had not been picked up. Road guide pickup. While First Lieutenant Lawson was in place in the road guide detail, the rest of the BLT prepared for the road march. The logistics officer, Captain Edwards, briefed the motor T platoon commander, Second Lieutenant Fossil, on the details of the convoy and guidance on picking up the road guides. He stated they would be marked with chem lights at pre-selected checkpoints and pairs, and recommended that Fawcett put his best driver in the pickup vehicle. He further emphasized to ensure all Marines with chem lights were picked up, since First Lieutenant Lawson had not provided a road guide roster. However, Captain Edwards did not discuss the artillery battalion convoy that would be following them, thinking there would be no conflict. So Captain Edwards should be making a bigger deal that he doesn't have a roster at this point. Captain Edwards also briefly discussed keeping custody of the road guides until the morning when Motor T would refuel the companies, but there was no specific direction on how this was to happen. Second Lieutenant Fossil assumed the road guides would remain in the supply vehicles and return to their parent companies the following day. Second Lieutenant Fawcett was subsequently conducted his own planning, assigned a driver and assistant driver, Lance Corporal Barrett and Lance Corporal Kimball, to the pickup vehicle and briefed his Marines. Lance Corporal Barrett was present for his briefing and understood he was supposed to pick up pairs of Marines who would be identified with chem lights, but he did not know the number of Marines he was expected to collect. This is like a huge deal. They're just driving through the desert picking up humans, and they don't know how many humans they're supposed to be picking up. He was aware of the separate artillery convoy, since Second Lieutenant Fawcett was likewise unaware. Lance Corporal Kimball was not present for the brief and had to be briefed by Lance Corporal Barrett minutes before departing. From this brief, Kimball believed their vehicle would be the last opportunity for any road guide to be picked up. I can't remember if it says in here, but I believe the artillery battalion was at least from 10th Marines. I could look that up later. Or someone can comment. After final preparations, the BLT convoy departed with Lance Corporal Barrett's truck at the end, followed only by Staff Sergeant Dozier, the Motor T chief, in a Humvee. The first complication with the road guide pickup occurred 10 minutes after the convoy started. The artillery unit's first checkpoint was on the BLT's route before their own first checkpoint. As Lance Corporal Barrett passed the artillery unit road guides, he and Lance Corporal Kimball convinced them to board the vehicle, believing they were the last opportunity for them to be picked up, not aware of the other artillery convoy. The next issue occurred the next issue at the BLT checkpoint 1. The battalion convoy did not turn onto the fork that Lawson did during his route recon and the road guide posting, so they never passed Lance Corporal Rother's position on the side road. When they reached Lance Corporal Key's position at checkpoint 1, Lance Corporal Barrett stopped to pick him up. Reports about this pickup also conflict. Lance Corporal Barrett and Kimball stated all road guides they collected were in pairs, and they were never told of another Marine that needed to be picked up. On the other hand, Lance Corporal Key was obviously alone at his point, and he said that as he boarded, he told the pickup vehicle drivers there was another Marine that needed to be picked up. He encountered the artillery unit Marines on board who stated they had been picked up by the wrong vehicle. Lance Corporal Key then assumed one of the artillery vehicles would pick up Lance Corporal Rother. Regardless of whose statement is accurate, the reality is Lance Corporal Rother was left at his position. Key decision point. While it was not Lance Corporal Key's duty to ensure Lance Corporal Rother was picked up, it is every Marine's duty to look out for one another. When he did not see Lance Corporal Rother on the vehicle, he should have demanded assurance he was picked up, either in the moment or at the conclusion of the event. I can't put anything really on the Lance Corporals in this story. I mean, he could have, but there's so many other things going on here and so much other confusion. It's not on the Lance Corporal here. Sorry, Navy Safety Comm man, Navy Safe Comm, Navy Safety Command. I mean, it could be considered a layer in the Swiss cheese, but to say that there's some sort of culpability and responsibility on a Lance Corporal in this situation, don't buy it. Lance Corporal Barrett followed the convoy and stopped at BLT Checkpoint 2, which was also Artillery Checkpoint 2, where First Lieutenant Lawson decided not to post Marines. The artillery road guides posted there climbed into the truck, but upon learning it was not from their convoy, they climbed down. The first two artillery road guides that had been erroneously collected also climbed down. In the trailing Humvee, Staff Sergeant Dozier noted these Marines getting off. Lance Corporal Barrett then continued following the convoy. Lots of confusion starting, even if people don't realize it. It's also it's weird to me that the checkpoint 2, which happened to also be the artillery checkpoint 2, there's no common operating picture here. Common operating picture. If all these big units are operating in the same AO, they should checkpoint 2 should be checkpoint 2 for everyone. Checkpoint 1 should be checkpoint 1 for everyone. The first two are I read that. After checkpoint 3, they collected the Bravo Company Marines, who later reported the high speed of the pickup vehicle. In their impression, Lance Corporal Barrett was concerned about losing sight of the vehicle in front of him. One of them was physically dragged onto the vehicle as it was moving. Yeah, so if you're just a Lance Corporal on Lance Corporal power without a proper brief, the only way to make sure you don't get lost is to quickly follow the vehicle in front of you. Adding further disorganization, Lance Corporal Barrett's recovery vehicle did not stop to pick up the India Company road guides at checkpoint 4. The report does not explain why they were overlooked. When the rear element of the convoy reached the assembly area, First Lieutenant Lawson went to Staff Sergeant Dozier to ask how many road guides were picked up. Their interaction seemed to amplify the confusion of who had been picked up. According to the report, Staff Sergeant Dozier stated 6 road guides were picked up. He likely was including the artillery Marines. Lawson asked if 2 were road guides who were left down the road, to which Staff Sergeant Dozier said yes. It is uncertain if he meant the artillery Marines that dismounted or the Indian Marines who were never picked up. So this is even starting to get a little confusing to read. There's confusion, obviously. They're now to where they're supposed to be, and they don't even have. Remember, he had 8 Marines to start with, and then Staff Sergeant Dozier is saying that only 6 were picked up. Notwithstanding that, the good First Lieutenant Lawson was supposed to have 14 Marines to start with. In my book, 6 doesn't equal 8. Lawson then tried to clarify if only 4 Marines had been picked up, since he posted 6 road guides, to which Staff Sergeant Dozier said, "Right. It seems clear that 2 did not understand each other. First Lieutenant Lawson must have realized this, because after the battalion was posted, he returned to Checkpoint 4 with a vehicle and picked up the India Marines and returned them to their company the next morning." Key decision point. This conversation was another crucial moment in which this mishap could have been avoided. The clear confusion about road guide pickup should have prompted First Lieutenant Lawson to report the issue to battalion leadership, who could have mandated a unit-wide accountability check. Yeah, we do that. So when you are training at 29 Palms, and sometimes when you are overseas, they'll do a accountability drill where everyone has to be accounted for. You don't have to like necessarily like put them all in the same spot in the same formation and like read their names. Johnson here, Bob here, Smith here. You just have to know where they are. Okay, I have a retrans site at Lead Mountain. And that has 4 Marines there. It's led by Sergeant Umpty Frats, and then I have Corporal Schmuckatelli, and I have Lance Corporals Smith and Lance Corporal Jones there. Those are my 4 Marines. Okay, blah, blah, blah. And you go down the line. It was a big deal. You're supposed to get your accountability done in a certain amount of time. Again, everything the Marine Corps does is usually written in blood. Accountability. The BLT completed its road march at approximately 2:30 in the morning on 31 August and conducted actions to prepare for their defense evolution in the morning. So just that sentence right there kind of illustrates something. You're tired. You completed road march at 2:30 in the morning, and you already have like this defensive exercise that you have to prepare for. Not a lot of sleep, and I can tell you when I don't have a lot of sleep, it does weird things to your mind. Going one night without sleep, I can do it no problem. At TBS, I went almost 2 full nights without any sleep, and I think I told the story in the TBS episode. I basically like fell asleep on my machine gun. Once the entire convoy was staged in the assembly area, Lance Corporal Barrett picked his vehicle and went to sleep, not believing it was his responsibility to get the road guides back to their units. He and Lance Corporal Kimball assumed the road guides, dismounted, and returned to the unit, not realizing the 2 Bravo Company Marines and Lance Corporal Key remained and slept in the bed of the truck. Shortly after dawn, the Bravo Company leader sought out the logistics train to find their Marines from the road guide and quartering party detail. He found Lance Corporal Barrett's vehicle and collected his 2 Marines. Lance Corporal Barrett woke after this and realized Lance Corporal Key was still in the back of his truck. Lance Corporal Key asked if Lance Corporal Rother had been picked up, but was informed he was the only one in the area. With neither Lance Corporal Barrett nor Lance Corporal Key having any instructions for returning Key to Kilo Company, Lance Corporal Key stayed in the truck for the remainder of the exercise. Early the same morning, First Lieutenant Lawson clearly still had a suspicion something was wrong, because he approached the battalion XO, Major Holm, to inquire if any company reported missing Marines. That's kind of silly. It's like a backwards way to do accountability. The XO replied no one had given him reason to believe a road guide had not been picked up. Regardless, 3 heavy machine gun vehicles were sent to retrace the convoy route as far as Checkpoint 1. They stopped at the intersection and had Marines in the turret check the area, but no one observed a Marine at the position. Lance Corporal Rother's post would have been another 400 meters further down the intersection road. Yeah, you never would have seen them from 400 meters when you're in camis in the desert. Even if he was there, and I don't know, we'll see. I don't know if they ever determined when he actually left his post. Key decision point. Lawson's engagement with the battalion XO was another opportunity to prevent the mishap. Upon hearing there was concern of a missing Marine, the XO should have initiated a unit-wide accountability check immediately. The XO, so upon hearing there was a concern of a missing Marine. Yeah, I guess. I'm just thinking about this for a second. But First Lieutenant Lawson didn't definitively say, "Hey, I think there's a missing Marine." Yeah, I guess they should. I mean, yes, they should have done a unit-wide accountability check. I'm just trying to think if I have anything else to say about that. Let's move on. By the way, we're on page 5. This document is 10 pages, so this is gonna be a long one. At the end of the exercise, at approximately noontime, for Lance Corporal Rother's squad, this verification took place between 1700 and 1800. His fire team leader, Lance Corporal Palat, reported to the squad leader, Sergeant Turnell, the presence of 3 of the 4 fire team members. It is uncertain if or how the squad leader reported numbers to the platoon sergeant. What further complicated accountability was Sergeant Turner's departure from the base that evening to visit family members in the area. He did not return until the next morning. The platoon sergeant was aware of Turnell's departure and placed another fire team leader, Corporal Harbinson, as an acting squad leader in Sergeant Turnell's absence. The platoon commander and the other company leadership did not know of his departure, and no special liberty requests were provided. So that's really odd to leave the training area at 29 Palms when you're out there just because you have like family in the area. It's not that type of thing that you would do. You stay from, all the way to end exercise, and then you still don't leave. There's still stuff to do. That's odd. At 1800, Second Lieutenant Johnson asked Sergeant Clyde the status of the personnel, to which he replied the squad leaders reported everyone was accounted for. At 2000, the company gunnery sergeant, Staff Sergeant Eisenbach, received a, quote, thumbs up from all platoon sergeants regarding personnel accountability. Yeah, that, hey, we're good, thumbs up. That's dangerous, because your definition of thumbs up and my definition of thumbs up might be different. At 1900, the armory was open for weapons turn-in. The armory was considered in a thumbs up status if all weapons were accounted for by a weapon physically present in the armory or by the possession of a custody receipt card of a checked out weapon. With this criteria, the company armory reported to the company gunnery sergeant at 2030 that the armory was up. Since he had a card for Lance Corporal Rother's weapon. So basically, when you're counting for weapons in the armory, you physically see a weapon, you physically see a weapon, you physically see a weapon, you don't see a weapon, you look where that weapon's supposed to be, and there's a ECR card there because that Marine has it checked out, and then you keep going. So that's how you account for weapons. Just accounting for weapons is different than physically seeing and touching each weapon. You can still get accountability, but it's odd because his weapon should be in the armory if they're saying that they received thumbs up and all personnel are accounted for. They're not. To me that means the weapon should be in the armory. At 2030, on 31 August, approximately 24 hours after Lance Corporal Rother was dropped off, the Kilo Company commander, Captain Henderson, returned from a battalion meeting in which the BLTCO stressed that he wanted strict accountability of personnel, weapons, and classified material before anyone went to bed. The company commander looked for the rest of the company leadership to hold a meeting. The rifle platoon commanders were celebrating at the beer garden, so the meeting was held with just the company CO, XO, first sergeant, company gunnery sergeant, I'm throwing in company gunny. It just says gunnery sergeant. The weapons platoon commander and the weapons platoon commander. Captain Henderson related the BLTCO's words on accountability and stated he assumed the platoons were accounted for since the platoon commanders were out. I'm going to read that again. Captain Henderson related the battalion CO's words on accountability and stated he assumed the platoons were accounted for since the platoon commanders were out. Okay. The company first sergeant confirmed personnel accountability, and the gunnery sergeant confirmed the armory was up, quote unquote. The company commander and rest of the company secured at 22:30 under the impression accountability criteria had been met. Their impression was wrong. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot kind of going on here, and it's hard to kind of just, my brain's starting to turn spaghetti a little bit. There's a lot of different moving pieces. There's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of miscommunications. There's different, like I mentioned before, there's different kind of chain of commands going on. Well, different like units moving, and it's not hard to see how, because of how disorganized and all these assumptions, that those layers of Swiss cheese I talked about at the start are starting to line up. So there's nothing that would stop something from just going through hole after hole after hole. The next morning on 1 September, the Kilo Company officers departed to the main base for CAC's debriefs. At the same time, the company gunnery sergeant and first sergeant held a formal formation and received an all-present report from the platoon sergeants, despite the fact that Lance Corporal Rother and his squad leader were not actually present. The company was then broken into 3 working parties to conduct a range sweep, vehicle washdowns, and ammunition loading. There were no noontime or afternoon formations because of these ongoing working parties. I mean, they definitely should have had accountability from by now. All that other stuff notwithstanding. I mean, this is NDEX. Yeah, I know what building they're probably talking about because Marine Corps never changes. They go to main side. It's a big conference room. Usually the commanding general is sitting at one at the head of the table, and you get all the battalion commanders, company commanders, special staff officers all around. It's like a hot wash. At approximately 17:30, Corporal Harbinson, the acting squad leader, realized he had not seen Lance Corporal Rother all day and asked the platoon sergeant, Sergeant Clyde, where he was. It was at this point that Sergeant Clyde approached the Kilo Company gunnery sergeant, Staff Sergeant Eisenbach, with, quote, a problem. He reported he thought Lance Corporal Rother was assigned to the range sweep detail, but had not been seen all day. Staff Sergeant Eisenbach asked who his squad leader was, and was the first person above the platoon sergeant to learn that Lance Corporal Rother's squad leader had left the base the night before and not yet returned. That's really odd. I don't know what's going on with this squad leader. You don't just leave the base, one, because there's stuff going on. You don't just let your Marines do all the dirty work where you're out visiting with your family. I don't care if you haven't seen your aunt, uncle in years and they happen to live next to the base. It's not time for this right now. Staff Sergeant Eisenbach and Sergeant Clyde then briefed the company first sergeant together, who then briefed the company commander, Captain Henderson. Captain Henderson gathered facts for 5 minutes and asked the platoon commander, Second Lieutenant Johnson, if he knew where Lance Corporal Rother was. This was the first moment Second Lieutenant Johnson was made aware of Lance Corporal Rother's absence. The company commander then sought out the battalion, the BLT commander, to inform him of the issue. The BLT commander immediately reported Lance Corporal Rother's unaccounted for status to the regimental landing team, the RLT commander, who assumed responsibility for the search efforts. It was not until this moment, almost 48 hours since Lance Corporal Rother was supposed to have been picked up at his road guide position, almost 24 hours since the rest of the company had returned to Camp Wilson and taken accountability, and almost 12 hours since a formal company formation was held and his platoon was reported, quote, all present, that the search effort for Lance Corporal Rother began. Wow, so he's been out in the desert for 48 hours by himself, and I mean, look at these dates. It's like the middle of the summer in 29 Palms. Google what the temperature is in the middle of summer in 29 Palms, California. Search and rescue efforts. Within an hour of Lance Corporal Rother's status being reported to the RLT commander, vehicles and aircraft from adjacent units began to sweep the previously known location of the BLT. This initial search discovered a stone arrow pointing generally east and Thermal devices were used to scan the area, but there was no sign of Lance Corporal Rother. Over the next few days, more aircraft and search parties were added to the effort, and the search area was continually brought in to no avail. While the field search was beginning on the evening of 1 September, the unit called the base provost marshal's office and local civilian law enforcement requesting assistance. The next day, they sought support from civilian agencies with search dogs. This had to be requested through the California Office of Emergency Services, who offered to make available other state search and rescue resources, but the watch officer making this coordination indicated that they were only requesting the search dog assistance. Why? Why would you not request everything under the sun at this point? In the late evening of 2 September, the dog teams arrived along with a search and rescue expert. They began search efforts at approximately 03:45 on 3 September. The morning of 3 September, a desert survival advisor from the National Park Service provided a survivability estimate based on the 107-degree average temperature. Okay, you don't have to Google it. It's 107 average. That if Lance Corporal Rother was fully rested and hydrated at the time he was posted, he would not survive beyond the evening of 3 September. When provided more accurate information of Lance Corporal Rother's physical condition at the time of his posting, this estimate was recalculated and showed Lance Corporal Rother could have traveled between 9 and 27 miles, depending on when he left his original position, and that he likely would have suffered heat stroke and death between 1600 and 2200 on 31 August, a full day before his unit even identified his absence. That's criminal. Absolutely criminal. Really sad. The initial search for Lance Corporal Rother continued until 1304 September, at which time the search mode was changed from an active effort to a passive one that would occur during normal training through the conclusion of CACs and the units returned to their home base. The active search continued beyond the estimated reasonable survivability time for Lance Corporal Rother. This search between 1 and 4 September included, but was not limited to, 139.9 flight hours in helicopter and fixed-wing aircraft, approximately over 1,700 persons from the ground combat element and combat service support detachment, professional assistance from the park rangers from Joshua Tree National Monument, and 7 dog teams from the California Rescue Dog Association. This effort was unsuccessful in locating Lance Corporal Rother. It was not until 2 extensive follow-on searches were conducted in subsequent months that the skeletal remains of Lance Corporal Rother were found 17 miles from his last known position. Rother's final days. The following is a summary of the probable events of Lance Corporal Rother's demise based on the nature of his belongings and surroundings as determined by the SAR experts who located his body. We cannot know at what point Lance Corporal Rother decided his unit wasn't coming back for him or when he started walking to find help, but we know he backtracked to his unit's last known position and left a stone arrow indicating his intended movement. As identified by the investigating officer, this was the behavior of a Marine intent on being found. Lance Corporal Rother then made it 17 miles in an average 107 degree temperature before trying to make a sun shelter to get out of the heat. He appeared to have tied and built this shelter by spreading his poncho liner over a crustole bush, but it is believed his attempt may have had the opposite effect and actually created an quote oven that accelerated his dehydration. After a period of time, he exited his shelter in a likely state of delirium and, in classic heat stroke behavior, shed his clothes and traveled roughly 100 meters before losing consciousness and expiring from dehydration. Yeah, it's kind of essentially when you're in this state of mind, or I'm teaching us, like you kind of just go nuts, for lack of better terms. Like he takes it off all his clothes. He's running, like obviously he's dehydrated. Like that's not going to solve anything, but you're just not thinking straight at this point. your body is not going to function properly, including your brain and the decisions that you make. Really sad. Some key takeaways. We're sometimes inclined to point at a single person or action at the cause of the mishap, but General Al Gray's reflection on this incident encourages a more comprehensive approach. When a Marine is killed or injured while training, more than the immediate environment of the occurrence must be examined. The quality of leadership at every echelon of the organization, its overall level of training, the degree of supervision of those directly involved in organized SOPs, standing operating procedures, are among the matters which must be closely and carefully investigated. With this guidance in mind, we encourage the following actions and considerations in hopes of preventing another avoidable tragedy like this one. Personnel accountability comes first. Number one. There were egregious oversights and violations in this event, but there were also simple mistakes that present day leaders can easily repeat. Yeah, so I mean, I think I learned this lesson. I mean, I knew of the story, but I go back to that stupid spare barrel that I failed to properly account for because everyone said, hey, oh yeah, that other guys have it. And I just trusted there's assumptions and it's embarrassing to fail to do something so simple, but it was a lesson that I learned, and I take that with me to this day in my civilian job. It is easy to get too focused in an operation or distracted by friction, but we must make the effort to deliberately plan for accurate accountability and take tactical pauses to self-evaluate how well we are executing the plan. Number two, ensure risk management is included in the operational planning process. As witnessed in the initial Frago meeting, leaders were focused on the operational aspects of the mission, and none took time to consider hazards and risks. Incorporating risk management would have enabled them to identify the lack of personnel accountability, planning, and other issues. Number three, is it your risk to accept? Question mark. A number of times in this incident, individuals accepted risk that was above their pay grade to accept. One of the key tenets of risk management is to, quote, accept risk at the right level. Change is the mother of all risks. When you see a risk, particularly when plans are changing and there is evident confusion, rise it to the right level for decision or mitigation. Number four, have an effective lost Marine plan. So this is getting a little bit more pragmatic and tactical. This applies both to the guidance we give our Marines and the responsibility taken by a command when a Marine is lost. In our safety briefs, we must explain the exact actions a Marine is to take if they are separated from the unit. Do they stay in their last known position? Do they move to the nearest road or landmark? Given the vast nature of the desert, Lance Corporal Rother stood almost no chance of making it to safety on his own. Had he remained in place, his chances of being located were much higher. We must consider the best course of action for a lost Marine specific to the environment they are training in and ensure every Marine understands the plan. At the command level, the Marine Corps was commended by SAR experts for the amount of manpower and resources put into finding Lance Corporal Rother, but also criticized for the lack of a search and rescue pre-plan and general ignorance of professional search and rescue techniques, and delaying and underusing civilian professionals. A unit should not be trying to figure out a search plan after a Marine is lost. Have a plan in place at the start, tailored for the environment and resources. Number five, leaders, never let your rank outweigh wisdom. The first lieutenant's dismissal of the accurate protest by his junior Marines was a link that could have broken the chain of events to this mishap. We have a responsibility to respect the inputs from our subordinates, especially when it comes to safety. Yeah, I mean, sometimes the lowest, level, for lack of better terms, the most junior guy, the guy that is maybe in some ways like least jaded or least indoctrinated, could have outside the box idea that actually makes sense. Every Marine is a safety officer. Number 6. Like the principles of crew resource management, every Marine has a responsibility and power to take action. When something isn't right, especially when lives are endangered, say something. While it was not Lance Corporal Key's duty to ensure Lance Corporal Rother was picked up, it is every Marine's duty to look out for one another. When Lance Corporal Key or others did not see Rother after they were collected, they should have demanded assurance he was picked up. Number 7, effective communication means both sides understand the same thing. Effective comms includes backing up supportive feedback and acknowledgement that personnel correctly understand the conversation between First Lieutenant Lawson and the Motor T Chief at the end of the convoy movement was a clear breakdown in comms in which neither understood each other, and yet neither took action to clarify or report the issue to battalion leadership. Yeah, so someone said this today. What did they say at work? They said communication is both receiving and transmitting. So they both transmitted, but neither of them really received what the other person was saying. Number 8, take desert survival classes seriously. Given that this absent went unnoticed for almost 48 hours, Lance Corporal Rother's chances of being found alive were low from the start. But had he heeded the desert survival training he received before CAX, he may have improved his odds slightly. Given the vast nature of the desert, there was almost no chance of successfully walking to safety. According to the, quote, survival rules briefed in his training, walking 3.5 miles in 110-degree heat sacrifices a half day of survival time. Regardless of when he began moving, given the distance he walked, Lance Corporal Rother sacrificed a significant amount of hydration, shortened his survival time, period. Leaders, ensure your Marines understand their survival training and they take it seriously. Lance Corporal Rother's exact actions and final thoughts can only be speculated, but what we know about his final days is that while his platoon and company returned to Camp Wilson, Lance Corporal Rother was alone in the desert while his fellow Marines cleaned gear and took accountability, quote unquote. He was alone in the desert. While his platoon sergeant visited family and his platoon commander celebrated the end of CAX, criminal, he was alone in the desert. While his company leadership was being debriefed on their actions during CAX, Lance Corporal Rother had likely given up on anyone coming back for him and desperately began a 17-mile trek to try to find help before he died, alone in the desert. The sheriff's department's deputy chief, who led the team that finally found Lance Corporal Rother's remains, said, "We always advise that anyone in the desert or mountain stay put." But once he decided to move, he moved with direction and purpose. He made it to less than half a mile from Old Highway 66 near a community. He made a heroic effort and he almost succeeded. He had to see the highway. You can't miss it. It was simply too far to make it. Do not let the lessons from his death go unlearned. So one thing I did when I was the RSO OIC of a range is I gave the road guards like these smart cards. It had their mission on it. It had their grid coordinate. Like a 8-digit grid. It had like a radio frequencies, because they usually have like black gear. We call it black gear. Or whatever. I mean, I can't remember what kind of comms they would have had, but made sure they had comms, made sure they had water. They had more water and food than they ever need for, being out there for a day. And I just thought that was, and it's not a lot of information, but it's still information. It probably had some immediate actions on there in case something happened, like what the Lost Marine Plan was. And it just, showed that we were deliberately planning and doing this effort, whereas this situation, it was not very deliberate. They were at the end, right? So they went back to Camp Wilson. So Camp Wilson is like the staging area that's like just a couple 3 miles, whatever it is, from Main Side. It's not terribly far, but you need a vehicle to get back and forth between Main Side and Camp Wilson. So they were I would say, smelling the barn. They were excited to get back to Camp Wilson, excited to be done with this exercise, excited to get clean, excited to drink beer apparently, um, excited for all those index type things. Go home and get a nice cool shower and uh, you know enjoy, I guess, being done the trading, which clouded their judgment as well. That's not really talked about here, I guess, but I think there's a bit of a human factor there that could have contributed it. Everyone was just so excited to get back that, and maybe if nothing happened that whole exercise, you probably had a little bit of complacency. And so, yeah. Again, nothing really to do with hunting and fishing, obviously, but I'm putting on my channel anyway because I think it's a story that needs to continue to live on forever, and it's just the way I am going to make that happen. So we learned a lot. We just went through several of the lessons learned. The buddy system, again, as we kind of made light of it at TBS here and there with probably inappropriate jokes. Uh, it's I could have saved his life. There was just many assumptions that led to another to another. There's, you know, kind of fluffy communication, like we're up. Well, what does up mean? How many Marines do you have? How many are you supposed to have? If you have 10 and you're supposed to have 11, that's a problem. They left from the get-go. They were short manpower, so they couldn't put the Marines in buddy pairs. So yeah, and even after learning all of this, the last time I was at 29 Palms, or the 3 times I was training, uh, a jet pilot died. Um, and I Googled it, and this military.com article came up titled "Deadly Hornet Crash Result of Low Dive During Strafing Run." Yeah, it was at night, and that's the story. I think some people said that they heard or saw a flash in the sky or something from Camp Wilson. I didn't, but it made me realize that, like, just how dangerous some of this stuff could be inherently. So I felt like I had the obligation to take out all the danger and mitigate all the risks that I had within my control, because stuff still happens. That jet pilot, he was a major, probably had, I mean, he had a whole bunch of flight hours. He was a Top Gun pilot graduate, and so stuff happens. When I was training there that time, I saw 81s shoot outside the box. We were on a convoy live fire range, and me, my battalion CO, some range folks were up on this like, hill observation post, whatever you want to call it, and watching the convoy go through and doing their immediate action drills and reacting to near ambush, far ambush, and we look up and there's just like this explosion where there shouldn't have been an explosion. And so we called it into range control, and they locked that range down. Yeah, sure enough, a 81 millimeter mortar shot outside the box, which means it shot outside of where it is safe to impact rounds, way far away from the target. So imagine your target is the pitcher's mound, and the box is, fair play, and this round landed in the stands, right, way outside. Yeah, so I trained at 20 Palms 3 times. Again, I still don't remember like the first time I heard the story. It's just kind of something I always knew growing up in the Marine Corps. And I hope that they're still teaching it. I'm sure they are. If I had lieutenants or someone checking in, I would always make sure that they knew the story. I had the hard copy of the actual investigation somewhere. I still might have it in some of my military stuff. we had a pretty big, when I was with 110 and we were about to go training, it was a January CAX, and we would get in the battalion classroom. So like what was it, 2 floors? Yeah, 2 floors. The top wing, 110, the battalion buildings, they're all basically built the same. If you know, you know. All the staff you know got in there, and we talked about it. Talked about this story. So that's all. As always, kill something, drag it back to your cave, and eat it. See ya.